They fired me for being the CEO's daughter, but they didn't know I who actually owned the company. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Emma sat in the sterile conference room, her hands trembling slightly against the polished mahogany table. She could feel the weight of their stares, cold, calculating eyes that had once held warmth and camaraderie, but now brimmed with thinly veiled disdain. Her heart pounded like a drumbeat, each thud echoing through her chest as she replayed the words they just said to her, "We're letting you go." It wasn't about performance or competence. It never was. No, this was something far more insidious, a quiet coup orchestrated by whispers behind closed doors, fueled by envy and resentment masked as professionalism. "You're too close to the top," they had told her, their voices laced with faux sympathy. "It's not fair to the others." Translation? "You're the CEO's daughter." Emma clenched her fists under the table, nails digging into her palms. If only they knew. If only they understood how much deeper this ran than family ties. But no one did, not even her father. And she intended to keep it that way. Growing up as the daughter of Richard Hawthorne, founder and CEO of Hawthorne Enterprises, had always been a double-edged sword. On one hand, there was privilege, the sprawling estate, the private schools, the endless opportunities handed to her on silver platters. On the other hand, there was isolation. Friends became acquaintances when they realized what her last name meant. Teachers scrutinized her work harder than anyone else's, determined to prove she hadn't earned her grades. Even at family gatherings, relatives whispered about nepotism, speculating whether she'd amount to anything without Daddy's money. But Emma didn't want his money, or at least, not in the way everyone assumed. From an early age, she'd watched her father build Hawthorne Enterprises from the ground up, pouring every ounce of himself into its success. He worked late nights, missed birthdays, and sacrificed vacations, all for the company he loved. Yet despite his brilliance, he often made mistakes. Big ones. Decisions driven by emotion rather than logic, deals struck out of loyalty instead of strategy. By the time Emma turned 18, she'd already seen firsthand how fragile empires could be. That's when she decided to take matters into her own hands. At 22, fresh out of business school, Emma approached her father with a proposal. She wanted to invest in Hawthorne Enterprises, not as his daughter, but as an independent shareholder. At first, Richard laughed, assuming she was joking. When he realized she wasn't, his expression shifted to concern. "Why would you risk your inheritance like that?" he asked, genuinely baffled. "Because I believe in this company," she replied firmly. "And because I want to earn my place here, not inherit it." Her father hesitated but eventually agreed, perhaps sensing the determination in her voice. What he didn't know, and what no one knew, was that Emma had spent years quietly amassing wealth through savvy investments and side ventures. By the time she purchased her shares, she owned 70% of the company. 70%. Enough to control the board, dictate decisions, and reshape the future of Hawthorne Enterprises entirely. Yet she kept silent. To the world, she remained Richard's dutiful daughter, working her way up the corporate ladder like everyone else. She started in entry-level positions, grinding away in departments most executives wouldn't set foot in. Marketing internships, customer service roles, logistics coordination, it didn't matter where she landed, so long as she learned. Over time, she climbed higher, earning promotions based on merit alone. Or so everyone thought. What they failed to see was the meticulous planning behind every move she made. Every decision, every project, every innovation she spearheaded was designed to strengthen the company while subtly shifting power dynamics. She built alliances, cultivated trust, and dismantled toxic practices without ever revealing her true influence. It was a delicate balancing act, one that required immense patience and self-control. But Emma thrived under pressure. Until today. The meeting had started innocuously enough. Quarterly reviews, budget approvals, nothing out of the ordinary. Then came the bombshell. One by one, members of the executive team voiced their concerns about Emma's presence in the company. "She has access to information the rest of us don't," said Marcus, the CFO, his tone dripping with condescension. "How can we ensure fairness?" "She's biased," chimed in Claire, head of HR. "Her relationship with Richard clouds her judgment." Even Daniel, Emma's supposed mentor and closest ally within the company, nodded along solemnly. "It's not personal, Emma," he said, avoiding her gaze. "But perception matters. People are starting to question whether you belong here." Each accusation felt like a knife twisting in her gut. Not because they were untrue, she did have unparalleled access to information, but because none of them bothered to look beyond surface-level assumptions. They saw her as Richard's daughter, a figurehead propped up by privilege, unworthy of respect. Never mind the countless hours she'd poured into the company, the sleepless nights spent strategizing, the sacrifices she'd made to prove herself. When the verdict finally came, termination effective immediately, Emma forced herself to remain composed. She nodded politely, thanked them for their transparency, and left the room without shedding a single tear. Only when she reached her car did she allow herself to break down, slamming her fists against the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. Hours later, sitting alone in her apartment with a glass of wine and a view of the city skyline, Emma found herself reflecting on everything that had led her here. The betrayal stung, yes, but it also ignited something deep within her, a fire she hadn't felt in years. They thought they'd won, that they'd rid themselves of the inconvenient reminder of nepotism. Little did they know, they'd just declared war on the person who held all the cards. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a text from her father. "Are you okay? Heard about the meeting. Let me know if you need anything." Emma stared at the message, torn between gratitude and frustration. Of course he cared, he always did. But part of her resented him for being oblivious to the chaos swirling around him. Did he not realize how many people resented his leadership? How many knives were waiting to stab him in the back? She typed out a quick reply, "I'm fine. Don't worry about it." As she set the phone aside, her mind began racing with possibilities. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. In fact, it might be exactly the catalyst she needed to implement changes she'd been planning for years. Changes that would shake Hawthorne Enterprises to its core. The next morning, Emma arrived at the office earlier than usual, dressed impeccably in a tailored navy suit. She bypassed her former desk and headed straight for the boardroom, where the executive team was already gathered for their weekly strategy session. As she entered, all conversation ceased, replaced by stunned silence. "Emma." Claire stammered, clearly confused. "What are you doing here?" "I'm here to reclaim my seat," Emma replied calmly, taking her usual spot at the table. "And to discuss some urgent matters regarding the company's future." Marcus frowned. "You were terminated yesterday. You're no longer authorized to attend these meetings." Emma smiled faintly, pulling a folder from her briefcase and sliding it across the table. "Take a look at this," she said simply. Inside the folder were documents detailing her ownership stake in Hawthorne Enterprises, 70%, to be exact. Gasps rippled through the room as comprehension dawned on their faces. Some looked horrified, others furious, but none dared speak. "I've stayed silent for years," Emma continued, her voice steady and commanding. "Letting you believe I was just Richard's daughter, content to play second fiddle while you ran the show. But let me make one thing clear, I own this company. And starting today, things are going to change." Over the next few days, Emma implemented sweeping reforms, dismantling outdated systems and restructuring leadership roles. Those who had wronged her weren't fired outright. No, she was smarter than that. Instead, she reassigned them to positions better suited to their actual skills, ensuring they couldn't interfere with her plans. Allies she'd cultivated over the years were promoted, forming a new inner circle loyal to her vision. Despite the upheaval, morale among employees soared. Word spread quickly about Emma's bold takeover, inspiring hope in those who had grown disillusioned with the company's direction. For the first time in years, Hawthorne Enterprises felt alive again, buzzing with energy and purpose. But challenges remained. Powerful figures outside the company began circling like vultures, eager to exploit the instability caused by Emma's rise to power. Meanwhile, tensions within her own family threatened to boil over, particularly with her father, who struggled to reconcile his role as CEO with his daughter's newfound authority. Through it all, Emma stood firm, guided by the same resolve that had brought her this far. She refused to let fear or doubt dictate her actions, knowing full well that the road ahead would be fraught with obstacles. But she also knew something else. She wasn't fighting just for herself anymore. She was fighting for the soul of the company she loved, determined to honor its legacy while forging a brighter future. And though the battle was far from over, Emma couldn't help but feel a spark of excitement. After years of playing the long game, she was finally stepping into the light, and she wasn't about to back down now. The days following Emma's revelation were a whirlwind of activity, tension, and transformation. The boardroom, once a place where decisions were made with cautious deliberation, now felt like the epicenter of an earthquake. Every meeting began with palpable unease as executives exchanged wary glances, unsure of how to navigate this new reality. Emma sat at the head of the table, her posture commanding yet calm, exuding an air of quiet authority that left no room for dissent. Her first order of affairs was addressing the toxic culture that had festered within Hawthorne Enterprises. For years, she'd observed cliques forming among senior management, favoritism dictating promotions, and fear stifling innovation. Employees tiptoed around their superiors, afraid to voice concerns or propose bold ideas. It wasn't just inefficient, it was suffocating the company's potential. "I want transparency," Emma declared during one particularly heated session. "No more backdoor deals, no more whispered conversations in hallways. If you have something to say it here, in front of everyone. We're rebuilding trust, not just with each other, but with our employees, our clients, and our shareholders." To drive her point home, she introduced a series of radical changes: open forums where employees could speak directly to leadership without fear of retribution, mandatory diversity training for all levels of management, and performance evaluations based on measurable outcomes rather than subjective opinions. These initiatives weren't met with universal applause. Some resisted fiercely, accusing her of undermining tradition and destabilizing the company further. But Emma remained undeterred. "You can either adapt," she told them bluntly, "or find somewhere else to work." Meanwhile, outside forces began closing in. Competitors, sensing vulnerability in the wake of Emma's takeover, launched aggressive marketing campaigns aimed at poaching Hawthorne's top talent. Industry analysts speculated wildly about the company's future, painting dire pictures of internal strife and impending collapse. Even the media caught wind of the drama, publishing sensational headlines like "Hawthorne heiress seizes control," but at what cost? Emma handled the scrutiny with grace, granting interviews only when necessary and using those opportunities to reinforce her vision for the company. She spoke passionately about innovation, sustainability, and creating a workplace culture rooted in inclusivity and respect. Her words resonated with many, earning her praise from unexpected quarters. Yet behind closed doors, she faced relentless pressure, from investors questioning her decisions, from journalists digging into her past, and from rivals eager to exploit any misstep. One evening, after another grueling day of meetings, Emma found herself sitting alone in her office, staring out at the city lights. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her shoulders, heavier than ever before. She thought about the sacrifices she'd made, the friendships lost, the sleepless nights, the constant battle to prove herself in a world that refused to see her as anything more than Richard Hawthorne's daughter. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Turning, she saw her father standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. Emma gestured for him to come in, bracing herself for what might follow. Their relationship had always been complicated, built on love but strained by differing visions for the company's future. Since her takeover, things had grown even tenser. Richard struggled to reconcile his role as CEO with the knowledge that his daughter now held ultimate power over the business he'd poured his life into. He took a seat across from her, hesitating before speaking. "I never wanted this for you," he admitted finally. "All these years, I thought I was protecting you, keeping you safe from the cutthroat world of corporate politics. But instead," he trailed off, shaking his head. "Instead, I pushed you into it." Emma studied him carefully, searching for traces of resentment or regret. What she found instead was vulnerability, a side of her father she rarely saw. It softened her resolve, if only slightly. "You didn't push me into anything," she replied gently. "I chose this path because I believe in what this company stands for. Because I know we can do better, not just for ourselves, but for everyone who depends on us." Richard sighed, running a hand through his silver-streaked hair. "And what happens if you fail? Have you thought about that?" Emma leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. "Failure isn't an option. Not anymore." As weeks turned into months, Emma's reforms began to take root. Morale improved dramatically as employees embraced the newfound openness and accountability. Productivity soared, fueled by fresh ideas and renewed enthusiasm. Clients noticed the shift too, praising Hawthorne Enterprises for its innovative approach and commitment to ethical practices. But perhaps the most surprising development came from within the executive team itself. Slowly but surely, Those who had initially opposed Emma began to recognize the value of her leadership. Marcus, the CFO who had once questioned her competence, approached her one afternoon with a proposal for streamlining operations, a plan so well-researched and insightful that Emma couldn't help but feel a flicker of pride. "I may not agree with everything you've done," Marcus admitted cautiously, "but I can't deny the results. You've earned my respect." It was a small victory, but one that meant the world to Emma. Change, she realized, wasn't about winning hearts overnight. It was about planting seeds and nurturing them until they grew strong enough to withstand the storms. Yet even as progress unfolded, shadows lingered on the horizon. One name kept surfacing in hushed tones: Victor Langston, CEO of a rival conglomerate known for his ruthless tactics and insatiable ambition. Langston had long coveted Hawthorne Enterprises, viewing it as the missing piece in his quest for industry domination. With Emma's recent upheaval, he saw an opportunity to strike. Their first encounter came unexpectedly during a charity gala hosted by one of the city's most prestigious organizations. Dressed in an elegant black gown, Emma mingled effortlessly among the crowd, exchanging pleasantries with donors and dignitaries. That's when she spotted him, tall, impeccably dressed, and radiating confidence as he made his way toward her. "Emma Hawthorne," Langston said smoothly, extending a hand. "Congratulations on your meteoric rise." She shook his hand firmly, masking her discomfort with a polite smile. "Victor Langston. To what do I owe the pleasure?" Langston chuckled, though there was little warmth in it. "Straight to the point. I like that. Let's cut to the chase, shall we? Your little revolution has caused quite the stir. Some might say it's admirable. Others, well, let's just say they're concerned." Emma raised an eyebrow. "Concerned? About what exactly?" "Stability," he replied, his tone sharpening. "Your father built this company on solid ground. Now, thanks to your impulsiveness, it's teetering on the edge. A merger might be in everyone's best interest." "A merger?" Emma echoed, incredulous. "You mean an acquisition?" Langston smirked, unbothered by her bluntness. "Call it what you will. Either way, it would solve a lot of problems, for both of us." Emma stared at him, her mind racing. This wasn't just a threat, it was a declaration of war. Langston wasn't interested in partnership, he wanted control. And he believed her recent actions had weakened Hawthorne Enterprises enough to make it vulnerable. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, laced with steel. "Tell me, Victor, do you really think I'd hand over 70% of this company to someone like you?" For a moment, Langston's mask slipped, revealing a flash of irritation. Then he smiled again, though it failed to reach his eyes. "We'll see," he said simply, before turning and disappearing into the crowd. Back at her penthouse later that night, Emma poured herself a glass of wine and sank onto the couch, replaying the conversation in her mind. Langston's words haunted her, not because they intimidated her, but because they highlighted a truth she couldn't ignore. Despite all her efforts, Hawthorne Enterprises still faced significant challenges. The road ahead would be fraught with obstacles, and she couldn't afford to falter, not now, not ever. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a text from Daniel, her former mentor. "Be careful, Emma. Langston plays dirty." She stared at the message for a long moment before replying, "So do I." Setting the phone aside, Emma rose and walked to the window, gazing out at the glittering skyline. Somewhere out there, Victor Langston was plotting his next move. But Emma wasn't afraid. In fact, she welcomed the challenge. After all, adversity had shaped her into the leader she was today, and she knew deep down that she was ready for whatever came next. The game was far from over. The days that followed Victor Langston's ominous warning were a blur of strategy sessions, late-night research, and clandestine meetings. Emma knew she couldn't face him head-on, not yet. Langston was a master manipulator, skilled at exploiting weaknesses and turning allies into adversaries. To counter him, she needed to play a different game, one of patience, precision, and psychological warfare. Her first step was fortifying Hawthorne Enterprises from within. She called an emergency meeting with her inner circle, trusted executives who had proven their loyalty during the tumultuous months since her takeover. Together, they conducted a thorough audit of the company's vulnerabilities, identifying areas where Langston might strike. Financial records were scrutinized for irregularities, cybersecurity measures were upgraded, and key personnel were briefed on potential threats. "We're not just preparing for a fight," Emma told them firmly. "We're ensuring we don't give him any ammunition to use against us." But preparation alone wasn't enough. Emma understood that Langston thrived on chaos. He would seize any opportunity to destabilize her leadership and fracture the fragile unity she'd worked so hard to build. To preempt his moves, she decided to take the offensive. Langston's empire, though vast, wasn't invincible. Like all monopolistic ventures, it relied heavily on public perception and investor confidence. Emma tasked her PR team with launching a covert campaign to expose some of Langston's less savory practices, environmental violations, labor disputes, questionable mergers, all while maintaining plausible deniability. Simultaneously, she reached out to influential figures in the industry, forging alliances with those who shared her disdain for Langston's cutthroat tactics. One such ally was Margaret Chun, CEO of a mid-sized tech firm that had narrowly avoided being swallowed by Langston's conglomerate. Over coffee in a quiet corner cafe, Margaret listened intently as Emma outlined her plan. "You realize this is dangerous," Margaret said when Emma finished speaking. "If Langston finds out you're behind this—" "He won't," Emma interrupted, her voice steady. "Not until it's too late." Margaret studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "All right. Count me in." With Margaret's support secured, Emma expanded her network, rallying others who had suffered under Langston's dominance. What began as a small coalition quickly grew into a formidable alliance, united by a common goal: to stop Victor Langston once and for all. As tensions escalated, Langston made his move. In a surprise press conference, he announced plans to acquire a major competitor of Hawthorne Enterprises, a move that would consolidate his power and leave Emma's company isolated in the market. The news sent shockwaves through the business community, sparking panic among Hawthorne's shareholders. Emma watched the announcement from her office, her jaw tightening as Langston smirked confidently into the cameras. He thought he'd checkmated her, but what he didn't know was that she'd anticipated this exact scenario. Within hours, Emma issued a counterstatement, revealing damning evidence of Langston's unethical practices. Leaked emails, whistleblower testimonies, and internal documents painted a damning picture of corruption and greed. The media frenzy was instantaneous, with headlines like "Langston Empire Under Fire" dominating every major outlet. For the first time in years, Langston found himself on the defensive. Investors fled, lawsuits piled up, and his carefully curated image crumbled before the world's eyes. Yet even as his empire teetered on the brink of collapse, Langston refused to back down. Their final confrontation came unexpectedly, in a private boardroom arranged by mutual associates hoping to broker peace. Emma arrived dressed impeccably in a crimson blazer, her expression unreadable as she took her seat across from Langston. Gone was the smug confidence he displayed at the gala. Instead, there was a simmering rage beneath his polished exterior. "This ends now," Langston growled, slamming a folder onto the table. Inside were documents detailing Emma's covert operations against him. "You've crossed a line, Hawthorne." Emma glanced at the papers coolly, then met his gaze. "And you crossed it first, Victor. Did you really think I'd let you destroy everything my father and I built without fighting back?" Langston leaned forward, his voice low and menacing. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." "I know exactly who I'm dealing with," Emma shot back, her tone icy. "A bully who thinks he can intimidate his way to the top. But here's the thing, you underestimated me. And that's going to cost you everything." For a long moment, neither spoke. The air crackled with tension as they stared each other down, two titans locked in a battle of wills. Finally, Langston broke the silence. "What do you want?" he demanded, his voice laced with barely concealed fury. Emma smiled faintly, leaning back in her chair. "I want you out of my way. Permanently." The terms of their agreement were simple yet devastating for Langston. He would divest his interests in several key industries, effectively dismantling the monopoly he'd spent decades building. In exchange, Emma agreed not to pursue further legal action or release additional damaging information. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but one he had no choice but to accept. When the dust settled, Emma stood victorious, but not unscathed. The war with Langston had taken its toll, leaving her physically and emotionally drained. Yet as she looked around at the company she'd fought so fiercely to protect, she felt a profound sense of fulfillment. Hawthorne Enterprises was stronger than ever, its employees inspired by her resilience and vision. Her father, Richard, approached her one evening as she prepared to leave the office. For the first time in years, there was pride in his eyes, not just for what she'd achieved, but for who she'd become. "You've done something remarkable," he said softly. "Something I never could have done." Emma smiled, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We did it together, Dad. This company belongs to both of us." Richard nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "It always has." In the weeks that followed, Emma turned her attention to the future. With Langston neutralized and Hawthorne Enterprises thriving, she focused on expanding the company's reach, investing in sustainable technologies, and fostering a culture of innovation and inclusivity. Her journey had been fraught with challenges, betrayals, and sacrifices, but it had also taught her the true meaning of leadership. As she stood on the rooftop of the corporate headquarters, gazing out at the city skyline, Emma allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. She thought about the young girl who had once dreamed of proving herself, of earning a place in a world that doubted her. That girl was gone now, replaced by a woman who had faced her fears and emerged stronger for it. The road ahead would still be difficult, filled with new battles and unforeseen obstacles. But Emma was ready. She had faced the worst the world could throw at her, and she had prevailed. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the city in hues of gold and crimson, Emma Hawthorne knew one thing for certain. She owned the future.